Call the roll. Jean Embler,
Present.
Christina Ponte,
Present.
Judith Ann McLaughlin,
Present.
Paul Tilka.
Here.
Let the record show, Christina Lockhart Wells is not present.
The next, we have approval of minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Seconded.
Do you have a second?
I second.
All the other two. The one in the, oh.
Judith Ann McLaughlin. Approve. Christina Ponte,
Approve.
Paul Tilka. Jean Embler.
The minutes approved 3-1. By law, she can't abstain. She can't abstain. But anyway, we'll teach her on that. Who is that that said she abstained? Sean, Lily, would you like to go into the draft personnel policy handbook? Or-
We can, but are there any questions up front that anybody might have from reviewing it before?
So before we go through content, I'd like to back up a minute and talk a bit about the process and how is this going to flow. I'd also like to talk about, I had sent an email about being clear about how are we naming things so that, going forward, we all know which version we're looking at and whatnot. So if I could just ask to back up and say, how do you see this evolving until such point as it's approved by the commissioners?
I think it's all relative to how many changes we want. Do we need to go back and do research on a certain thing? That kind of thing. But I think we should set a goal at the end of September because our fiscal year is October 1. Just the email that's been sent around. That's the only one.
Well, unfortunately, I was not on the email distribution list, so I
Oh.
didn't see any of those. City Manager Gomez and I had a separate email chain going.
The comments are actually published in the agenda. They're in the agenda. And with the attorney's responses.
Around
Page
page.
Have to look
57.
at the agenda, go through the agenda.
57.
It's important to read the agenda.
Personally, I did not comment on the current version because I figured we'd have some discussion, specifically pertaining to the other draft of this policy that I'd like to discuss when it's appropriate. So I figure, I like how you presented, though. I think it's a good way to do within 2 weeks, submit comments back to Clara, who do we submit?
They
comments?
were supposed, I'm the secretary officio to the board by city charter, and they were you were asked to send them to me, and I did not receive any comments at all but the city manager forwarded me comments that the attorney responded to, and we included those in the packet.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm saying going forward, I did not submit any comments because
No,
of,
ma'am.
I was anticipating discussion.
Yes, you are welcome to do that. You can do that how you want to. We just take the handbook that the city manager provided to you to go through, and y'all work it through, take each section and suggest changes or no changes. And each time it'll be updated with strikeout and underlines until hopefully it's all done by September the 1st.
That clear? I think Jean was just looking to set, the path going forward. So I think we submit to you, do not submit to everybody, right? We have to
Right,
just
it'll
submit to
come to
you.
me and then I will forward those to
You'll combine
the
them.
city manager and he sends them to the attorney. Yes.
So let's do that. Within 2 weeks of this meeting, we are responsible for submitting comments on whatever version we decide is the right one to go forth with.
And just as a follow-up, I guess, to Jean's question, when we're going through a document, are we going through the one that was in the binder? That's the one that I was reviewing. Is that the same as
same
what's
one.
in the packet?
Yes, ma'am.
So personally, I would like to have a discussion as to, I took time, honestly, last night flipping through both versions. And I'm curious to know why we're not looking more closely at the more detailed version. This appears to be more of guidelines rather than policies and procedures. The other document is more inclusive, in my opinion.
What you can do is, as we're going through the book, when you get to that section, you can suggest what changes on that.
Okay.
Even if you're referring to something else, that's almost like comments to you, whatever, and then we work through each section. Apply each one at that time. It would be the easiest instead of trying to throw all the comments out on the whole book. We just work through each section on each page, and then each one of those that you want to add to it, if that's what you like, you could suggest changing it that way.
It seemed as though there was a comprehensive rewrite of the whole policy and procedure manual.
That
Right?
was with the old board, yes, yes.
I liked that. I mean, I don't know why we're not going
I
forth
don't
with
either.
that. You don't know either?
Well, all I know is that when it got ready to go, we had a meeting on it. It never really got discussed. They had a couple of discussions and there was really no explanation as to why the changes were made or whatever. Then I know that we got a new, which all this was explained at the last meeting.
Yes.
So we got a new HR person and the city manager had him to go through it as well because he plays a big part in it like the city manager. So whatever document goes to the board, the city manager is the one that has to agree to what you're presenting to the board.
Okay. And
And
we have a
so
new
he
city
asked-
manager, right?
So I don't, whatever, when you apply into what the city, the attorney did or whatever, as we're going through these sections, you can say, well, I like this. I like that in place of this, or, you just apply your.
I'm recommending that we discuss considering going with that version as the base
You can
and
do
or
that.
discuss
Mhm.
why we're not doing that. I don't know if you three or anybody else, I know we discussed briefly and I saw the historic, the comments, but I didn't see a strong basis for not going with a more thorough document. And so is there a reason to not go with that, Paul?
I think, the city's relied on it in the past. I was party to, and a lot of this administration was party to writing it in the first place. And I think maybe some on the commission viewed it as too complex and wanted to simplify it and gutted it to the point where we may be in jeopardy by going forward with I think staying with the original plan that's worked in the past might be the best idea and rework that one.
And the attorney can explain each section why he suggested the change. And that way we
Yeah.
can have it on
And-
the record, and you will
Yeah,
understand.
and basically, all of this is legal, technical things that we need to understand, but we can't create, where the attorneys have the benefit of other community, basically, not every single community has a civil service commission. And I think they may function differently, but this one functions as an advisory committee and not as a civil service commission per se, in my opinion. So whether we need to, or I don't know how to resolve that, and maybe we can, or even if it needs resolution. But it would take a charter or a referendum to get rid of us. So in the meantime, I think we need to stay here and stand our ground and try to have as much good input as we can.
So, Paul, so I'm understanding, are you advocating that the base document be the one that was signed by former Mayor Maggie Black with updates from Sean Lilly, that become our base document? But I'm hearing
Yes, I
Christina
do.
recommend that
Oh.
Attorney Trask's document be the
Yes.
base.
Well,
And to me,
I don't
if
know
I
how
might,
much different they are either.
oh, they're
Very.
huge.
Yeah, this is.
Okay, so we need to go, we
Yes.
need to follow your track, Madam Chairman, and dig into it that way.
Well, one aspect that I don't think is still clear, I had posed the question about the Board of Commissioners voted to have an entirely new handbook done. It's my understanding that they appropriated funding and our attorney went ahead and executed on that project. Before we go too far forward, are we allowed to just say, no, we're going to disregard what the Board of Commissioners said and approve for money and start with a different base document? I don't care one way or the other, so long as we're following the right rules. And if the Board of Commissioners voted for this project, how can we just suddenly say, no, we're going down a different path?
The attorney needs to append on all of that. That's why he's here, is that when you have questions like that, he is the one to be answering those questions.
So if I could just read into the record, the attorney did respond that he didn't know the answer to this question. Goes on a little bit to say the commission minutes would be able to provide an answer on that question. So has anyone had the opportunity to review the minutes so that we can make a determination before we go too far down a path of what's going to be our base document?
And to be clear, the draft that was written by the attorney is not what we're using currently, correct? So,
But you have a copy, I emailed
yes,
y'all a
ma'am,
copy.
I reviewed that one, but the current version that we're proposing making comments off of is not the work product of the attorney, to be clear.
Correct.
Which to me is I see the progression, but I'm not understanding how and why that got thrown out. And I would like to recommend that we consider going back to that version instead. It's very detailed and well laid out, and I went through both. And I don't think there's anything in this current policy that is not covered in that. Although the difficulty with that policy is I don't fully understand every aspect of it, but I think as a commission, we could talk through each of those. So I don't understand why we had paid someone an attorney to get us up to snuff and then did not proceed with that. So that's the question.
Okay.
I
for
think-
sorry.
Oh, I think we discussed this a little bit at the last meeting, and with all respect to the attorney who worked on the plan, I think it was very long, and it had the appearance of a plan that was written for another community that like changed out counties. I mean, in some places, the other county that it was written for was still in there and wasn't even like changed to Madeira Beach. And so it seemed like it maybe was too long and too complicated for a city of our size. I might have felt a little better if it seemed like it was written for scratch for Madeira Beach rather than kind of taking something and trying to like just change the words. So I think when the city manager was here last week, last meeting, kind of discussed having a plan that was more appropriate to our city. So I agree with the chair. I wouldn't want to dismiss what our charge was from the commission for sure. But I thought the main point was to have a plan that worked for our city, that made sure we were not open to any legal challenges, that we kind of covered our bases in that regard. So I felt like when I reviewed the one that was in the binder, that there were improvements to the one that was in force previously. and would appreciate hearing the new HR director's vision of the plan and from the attorney about what we need to cover our liability. But I guess I didn't feel as good about that other plan that like, let's make that our baseline. I think the one in our binder is a good baseline with maybe taking things that you liked from that other plan and adopting them per section as may be required, but a lot of it seemed a little bit overly complicated and not applicable to our city.
I think that's what eventually happened. I know that Bob Daniels took it back to the commission. I don't think it was a formal vote or anything like that, but they agreed it was too long, too complicated.
So is there, on record, again, I'm about the process, I'm not at this point content, but is there something in the minutes that the Board of Commissioners said, go out and do this, and that's officially documented and part of the public record? Therefore, I would think that if that's the case, then we would have to go on record again that the Board of Commissioners has changed their position. And, you know, we could still go forward, I believe, but I feel like there's a missing piece here. I mean, attorney, am I off base with this or?
Well, so the original charge of the commission was for me to produce, when we had our meeting with the commission, I gave the commission my opinion of the state of the current policy, which was that it was confusing. Some of the parts were outdated. It wasn't really laid out in a very organized way. And there's a lot of things that aren't in it that should be in it. And we've plowed this ground before. Length or complexity is not equivalent to the size of the employer once the employer gets past 50 employees. And so things, you know, I've done this since 1994, and so I know that things can come up even in smaller communities, and it's helpful to the employer to have those things right there, ready to read, when even the rare stuff that comes up, you know, loss of a license of someone. Doesn't come up often, but it sure is helpful to have a page and a quarter saying exactly how the employer is going to handle the loss of a license so that there's no scrambling around, figuring out what to do, making it up as you go along kind of a thing. And so I produced a first draft and handed it off to the administration because under the charter, the city manager is the person who recommends what the personnel policy should be to the commission after receiving y'all's advice and feedback. So as a first draft of a very long document, to be sure, I missed some jurisdictional references, but it wasn't expecting to be the last and final document. My expectation was that I would produce that document and that I and the administration would sit down in a conference room and go page by page and figure out, you know, where we would go so that we would come forward to this body in a unified way as much as we could. And if we couldn't agree, then the administration would tell you their position and I would tell you my advice, and you all would make such a recommendation as you desired to make. Under the previous city commission, one of the commissioners, who I believe is not with the commission anymore, who was a lawyer, I guess made her own opinion as to it's too long. And certainly as a sitting commissioner, she had that right to do. And so I also came to understand that the city staff people across the way didn't like some of what I was proposing. But, you know, the process is about, or should have been about, my explaining why I'm making the recommendations that I'm making. One example, I recommended in my draft that the city manager not be the terminating disciplining official, but instead that the department head does that, and that the city manager sort of stands as one step removed from that. And I make that recommendation because in my litigation experience, it's a lot better to defend lawsuits when a director who's more overseeing the day-to-day operations of that department and the work and the conduct of the employee being disciplined. But whatever cultural reasons that exist in the city, folks didn't want it, didn't like it, whatnot. And so I am just a lawyer, and so I don't put anything before y'all, you know, it's up to the manager. I don't know why the manager's not here today to talk about the choices that were made. But, you know, y'all know from the timeline that I provided, or that I supplemented, I guess, the manager originally produced it, that I did have a meeting with the new manager. You know, I did explain where I was coming from. And, you know, the response of the new manager was, I will look into it and figure out what to do. And that's the last I've heard until I sit here today. So I think at this point, you know, that the administration, for whatever reason, wants to do what it wants to do. And so, and that is its right to do. And one way or the other, a policy will be brought back to the city commission to vote on. And so I think if the administration is here today saying this is the document that we are going to proceed with, then it probably, because time is wasting every time we have one of these meetings, the administration needs to say, page 1, let me explain to you what I did and why I did it. You all ask questions. Page 2, here's what I did and why I did it. That's got to start at some point, as opposed to, you know, y'all have read the documents here today. You're not even unified on yourselves of what should be the base document. So ultimately, since the manager is the person under the charter who drives what recommendations to make, and the manager's representative is sitting here today, then I think we all need to take his lead and let him lead through the document.
Okay. And in your opinion, we're not in any kind of violation because the previous board set us on this path?
The board,
I just want to be on,
yeah, no, the board assigned our office a project to produce a draft. I think everybody understood that would, well, I don't know, everybody understood, but I believe the commission at the time, when they approved the project, understood that draft would go to the manager, and then the manager and I would work out, you know, what's ultimately would be given to y'all so that we could work through, you know, a unified document. Why it ended up getting discussed with a commissioner or the commission, I'm not still sure. I haven't seen any minutes where the full commission did anything, you know, subsequent. But I was involved in that. I wasn't asked to be involved in that. I don't know how it, you know, occurred. The administration has not to date spoken to that, why they did what they did or whatnot. So, and of course, the manager that was here at the time isn't here anymore. So, you know, Mr. Gomez wasn't a part of that and may not even know himself. So we are where we are. And, you know, when we get to particular pages where things are still, I think, a problem with this current draft, it's my duty to tell you. I mean, you still have language in here about sick leave that I've recommended numerous times not be in it. There is no such thing as abuse of sick leave. If sick leave is approved, it is approved, and you do not, and yet it's still here it sits. But that is for the administration, starting at page 1, to walk you through what has changed, what it hasn't, and let's talk about it.
thank you for the clarification on that, attorney. So it's your opinion that we can go ahead and proceed with what the city manager has asked us to do. We're not in any kind of violation
Yes,
of starting with this version.
correct.
With that, I'm satisfied that we continue on as planned. And now, if I understand, the goal will be that over the next several meetings, we will go page by page and discuss why these changes were recommended. Now, there's also an additional burden, though, that we have the time to go back and take a look at the other document to see, have we missed anything? But I think we can count on your input to say, my document differs in these ways.
And so, as to that, I think if you all have seen anything in my document or anyplace else that you want to recommend to the manager, that's for you to do. I'm not a member of this board. I've given you what I've given you. I've given the manager what I've given the manager. So it's really not appropriate for me to, re-advocate that things be added that were chosen not to be added, So when we get to particular pages such as sick leave and the administration is done telling you why it's done, what it's done, why it wants to keep what it wants to keep, I'll weigh in on that particular issue in this draft. But I mean, I don't think it's, everybody knows what I've recommended. Everybody knows what the administration's recommended. And so we're moving forward with this document. And so but y'all have read both. And so if you see particular passages or sections or whatnot that you feel should be included in this document somewhere, feel free to tell the administration what you want.
So then just to follow on, I had another question about how you will be engaged in this process. So what I'm understanding is that you will attend these meetings. We will go through section by section, and you will give us your input if appropriate, or if you feel that the city is at risk. That's kind of the process that I'm looking towards. And if we hope to have this done by the end of September, it would be helpful for me to have many steps in between so that we make sure that we meet that goal. Like so many pages per meeting, or we all have homework, or so.
Can I ask something?
yeah.
Not to just, so to me, I still have not gotten a clear answer as to why we're not using the attorney's work product. It sounds as though you are representing the manager at the moment and not for, this to me is, we had the meeting last time with the new city clerk or city manager, and he said, I'll review, I'll consider, it's not about length. And that was the last I heard. And now I don't have a clear response as to why we're not using that version and if it's been considered appropriately.
Well, I think it comes down to the prior city manager and that, didn't like the document, and some of the feedback from the staff was the same. I do think that this version, it's pretty simple to use, pretty easy to read. And I spoke with Robin this morning, and he's in favor of using the current version.
Okay. That's the question, because the prior city manager really doesn't matter at this moment, right? What his opinion was of it. To me, it's what we think is right. If he said that we did not hear that from the last meeting to this meeting, and so I'm asking for that clarification, so that's fine.
That's more of a process of history. I understand the old manager is not relevant at this point, but how we got to this point, it is.
You'll still work through each section and adding comments and, just like she had just explained, And then we'll finally come up with a final version.
Christine, any other concerns with starting?
Yeah, we're making for a lot of work for something that's already been done. That's been done by an attorney. So we're making for a lot of work here instead of just going with the other version. But
Yeah.
I guess if that's not something we are able to, as a committee, vote on or make a recommendation, then I guess we go forth with this version.
Why couldn't we ask for the attorney to identify areas in this version that we're working with?
The time for that is long gone. The
Okay,
process should have occurred where the administration and I had conferred in conference rooms, not wasting your time on doing it. And so at this point, you've heard very clearly from the administration, we're moving forward with this version.
Well,
I've sat in conference rooms with now both city managers to try to explain where I was coming from.
Yeah.
It's their role under this city's charter. It's the manager's role and duty and responsibility and right to come forward with a policy that they want to recommend. And so
Sure.
you all took an oath to uphold the city's rules and laws, and I'm here to support that as well. And so I think that this is not any of our call, it's the administration's call. And so the administration wants to use this template.
Yeah.
And so I think it's our duty to let the administration begin walking us through page by page and try to get to the end so that at least some improvements can be made and put before the city commission.
That's clear. Thank you.
Okay, I recommend that we move on. In the absence of the city manager, Sean, will you be taking the lead on this, or is this Clara's role?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
So I guess we're starting in your packet. It's page 9 of 67. Which is page 4 in the handbook.
You mean the packet that we just received?
Yeah.
Okay.
You'll get lots of packets working here.
Yeah.
So does anybody need time to read it, or do we just?
Yeah, I'd like to inquire, is there a reason why they're printed in a smaller format than,
It's because the changes are being tracked.
it's harder to read?
I know.
So what can we do about that?
Huh?
Can we do anything about that?
We could probably print that Word version. There was a lot of different formatting in it that when we went to publish it,
Right.
it would save some changes, it would take out some changes. It was, I think it was because there was just too many hands in it. But the one that we sent you to work through, it's bigger, the Word version, because we had almost had to
Oh,
rewrite the whole thing to take out those formats that we couldn't remove.
okay, maybe it is. I see. Same stuff.
And the one printed today is the same as the one that was in our binder.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
okay, very good.
And
Thank
you
you.
got a Word version of that, that
Right.
would be bigger. And then what I can do is what changes you make today, we can do the strikeout and underlines to the Word version, and when you get it, it'll be bigger. It'll be bigger.
Okay,
And we'll work with that each time. Each time we'll add the strikeout and underlines and, whatever changes that you have until we get all the way down to the end of it.
And again, just as I had suggested, I think we need a better way of naming, because with so many changes, there's a risk of
We
losing
can
track
call
and
this
version
one-
control.
Yeah, we
So
can call this one draft 1, and then what changes today, and we send out, it'll be draft 2. We can go on and on and on, all the way
With-
to the last one. if
Wh-
you
And I want to
to.
recommend also a date, version 1, the
Yes,
date,
okay.
et cetera. Does anybody have any other suggestions on all? Okay, because Paul, I heard you with a lot of the
sounds
same
good.
questions I had, that so many versions, so
Yeah, that
that'll
sounds
help a
good.
lot. Thank
That
you,
sounds
Karen.
great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. We can do that.
You ready then, Sean, to lead us through your suggestions?
Yeah, no, I'm ready. I've read this thing 100 times, so you folks need a little bit of time to read it, that's fine. But essentially, there's really no changes there, just a typo being fixed on the first page.
Are there additional policies and procedures? In section 101, it refers to this as not inclusive of all other policies and procedures. Section 101, is that where we're starting the beginning?
Yes.
Okay. It says it is not inclusive of all policies and procedures.
Section 101 is a section out of the city charter. It referenced the wrong charter section, so that was corrected. And they just, a little bit of language at the end of it. They reference purpose of it and then out of the city charter, and then, it goes on to describe it as a handbook.
I'm sorry, I'm still confused as to what we are doing here today. Are we pausing at each section, reading it silently, and then Sean, have you comment? How would my fellow commissioners like to proceed? I mean, for myself, I went through it and submitted my thoughts and concerns already, but I understand that it wasn't super clear about what we were supposed to do.
You
So
still make
what's the best use of our time right now to begin this review process?
You just take each section, and if you submitted any comments, you'll talk about your comments
Mhm.
and why you want that change to say what it does.
Okay.
Because that has to come back to a public meeting to be discussed.
Right. So now, do the rest of you then need time to read each section? So Paul is saying,
So if,
I mean, yeah, that's right. You'll just talk about what you already read and what you thought that you wanted to change to it.
so now we're clear on our task, but Paul, you would like time to reread each section before we, is that?
Maybe some points within that part.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah, I would say if we go article by article, we can see from the document if there are any changes that have already been submitted. The HR director can tell us any background, and then if any of us had notes, I didn't submit anything, but I have my notes, and if you submitted something, you still need to tell us now what you submitted and why, and then we can just go article by article, so.
And the attorney will tell us if he feels that there's anything that's missing. All right, good. So then, can we take it article by article? Does anyone have any questions about Article 1, general provisions?
are there other policies and procedures that are utilized as part of this handbook that are referred to in section 1.101, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down? It says it is not inclusive of all policies and procedures. To which other policies and procedures should I be looking at to see if deficits in these guidelines are not covered and they are in other procedures and policies? So to which policies and procedures does that refer?
I believe it's referring to the last line because we do have a union with collective bargaining agreement, and that would trump anything that's in here.
I would assume there's also policies and procedures within each of the departments. So this is not comprehensive to every single working group for the city, I would imagine, like Parks and Rec probably have procedures for how they handle the kids coming into
Correct.
this, that kind of thing. So this is like the general manual for overseeing everything else.
I would call it the balcony view.
And I guess for me, I'm going to take time to look through this and see what deficits comparing with the other one. And I understand this is simplified and you guys are preferring this. So for me, I'd want to see those other policies and procedures to see if those are covered. So can those be sent to us via email or are they available online?
We can certainly send you the collective bargaining agreement and I guess also any contracts.
Any other questions for Article 1, general provisions?
I'm good.
Article 2. I have a question. Why was anniversary date stricken?
It's addressed further along. You'll see it come back.
Mr. Lilly, do you have anything to add to the Article 2?
I do not.
I just have a question about the probation period being 6 months.
Correct.
Is that, I'm, in business, I'm more accustomed to a 3-month probation period so that you're not extending the time that of a hire that is not going to necessarily, they're not going to make it. But
Well, yeah, but I think
your expertise is,
6 months gives the city more time to make a decision about a particular employee. So you may find somebody failing after the first month with some training, they might be excellent at the end. So, and this has come in handy a few times when we had to deal with employee issues.
Mhm.
So,
At the
and
university, we had
we
6
moved them
months.
all to 6 months, as I remember, because of just consistency.
Ready for Article 3?
I've got one more question.
Of course.
In Article 2, having to do with rehire. It states a previous employee in good standing is rehired and must complete the benefit waiting period the same as a new hire.
That's correct.
Is it addressed someplace in the document about how their previous time will count? So if someone were employed by the city for 5 years and they left,
They would go back to 0.
they go back to, so that their previous
If there's
time
if there's a
does
break in
not
employment, it
count.
starts over.
Pardon me?
If there's a break in employment, it
Mhm.
starts over. Your seniority starts over.
Okay, and is that documented someplace in here?
I don't think so.
I recommend that be considered because I think that could come up that people are going to want to, you're going to have all these individual conversations. I'd rather it just be, if that's the policy, let's state it. Any other questions or comments about Article 2? Then let's take a minute and
Okay.
take a look at employment procedures. And it's my understanding that if something is written in yellow, is that feedback from the attorney? Is that what the difference between yellow and blue? I saw somewhere in a note, I think it's page. It's in our handout that you gave us today that says, it's from Sean Lilly saying attached are the changes recommended by the attorney. The changes are in yellow. Is that, so is that the difference between yellow highlights and blue in this document?
Yeah,
Or am
think
I
so.
mixing apples and oranges? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I honestly believe it was just highlighting as far as I remember.
Okay. Any questions or comments on employment procedures?
I was just wondering about the discrimination, age discrimination, being age 40 or older. And
That's the law.
That's the federal law,
federal law is 40.
40. Yep.
That is only the federal law. I do not recommend putting age 40 in. The Florida Civil Rights Act does not have any such range. This is one of the many areas where if they had just used my discrimination and harassment language, it would have been addressed. But employees should not be led to believe that they don't have any rights against age discrimination just because they're 39 years old. They absolutely certainly do under Florida law and under Pinellas County Code.
Okay, there you go.
How would you propose that, I mean, how would you propose that we correct this language
This
to
kind
better
of thing, I
reflect?
think you identify it as an issue, the administration notes it, and the administration has to go back and figure out what to do in terms of where it best to add it or address it and bring it back to you next time in next time's edition. Maybe using a different color, to show you where they've changed things
Mhm.
after this meeting.
Mhm.
is.
Could it just include age and not include a number?
Yeah. I think this needs to be a little bit more, there was a far more detailed description of discrimination in the other version, and I would love to see some of that adopted. This is almost like a two-liner, whereas it was like a whole page on it. it might be
Great.
wise to look at some of that language.
So the minutes will reflect that we're asking the city to go back and consider better language on this first section 301. I also noted that there's a very brief mention to prevent undue favoritism or nepotism and ensure a diverse, well-qualified workforce. Internal applicants meet, et cetera. It'll be awarded to the most qualified candidate. I remember in the other version, there was much stronger language about nepotism. This to me seems a little bit light. And that concerns me. It
It's
says,
further
"Yet-"
along. It's further along in the document, nepotism. So this
So-
section right here, so for example, if an employee leaves,
Mhm.
we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to put in for that job. So if I just move you up to that job and you're interested in that job, then I have a problem. So we post them all.
Mhm.
And even if you're internal, you go through the application process and, you get your interview like anybody else. And we also interview outside people at the same time to try and figure out who the best person is.
And I actually, when I was reading this, I have a question on that. Who chooses? So it says, and I think it's well written in doing internal and external applicants, but who, it's a little vague on the process after that. Like, how do I know you're being unbiased? You source it internal and external, but how do we make sure that we're not being biased? And how is that, very clear to anybody who wants to look at it in the hiring process?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So we're saying but the city will post these internally and externally to demonstrate we're not just looking for an internal person, we're also going to give fair chance to external, right?
Correct.
But then to me, there's another part to that process where you show that you're equally considering the two candidates, and it doesn't really describe how we're protected against someone, like, sure, you put it out externally, but where is where is it documented, what the process is after that? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
basically the supervisors go over it and, find the most qualified candidates and ask them for an interview.
And do we document why the others were not qualified? So if there were ever a question of nepotism or similar, we could address it?
We document anybody that's interviewed.
Okay.
Just because they applied, no.
Is that in? Oh, just not if they apply. Okay.
Right.
So if you look at, I don't know if you've gotten there yet, but section 305 deals with the selection process.
Mhm.
And, the few comments that I had written down is it references, quote, "the city's hiring practices," unquote. And I'm not entirely sure if there's some other document floating around out there that constitutes that.
We have a standard interview practice that everybody follows.
So since that, for whatever reason, is not included in the personnel policy, the first full paragraph, the questions that I had written down of concern is it seems to be driven towards that there are two people that would be present at each interview. And, in my experience, sometimes what that means, unless you really try to specify it, is that the director grabs his or her executive assistant and says, "Come sit with me, I got an interview." And yet that executive assistant has no background in what to look for in an engineer or whatever. And the assistant's boss is saying, "I like this person, don't you like this person?" And of course, the assistant's going to say, "Sure, boss, that sounds great to me." So usually when you do interview panels, you do 3 as kind of a standard. And you try to, it's the hiring authority. And one of the other questions I had is who has the authority to hire? Is it the director? Is it the division manager? Is it the city manager? It is the person in the room who actually has the authority to pull the trigger and make the offer.
No.
But then the other 2 people are usually people who have some, like, if it's in a department, you have a director, and then you have the division manager who's more directly going to be supervising that person, and maybe a future coworker or somebody, the people in the room doing the interviewing should have some background in being able to pick out who's our most qualified candidate. And I don't know if the city's procedures include it, but, a lot of jurisdictions use a scoring sheet, and comments. And so you go in and you have your questions, and then each member writes down, I like this, I didn't like that. I just give them a 1 for this, a 4 for that, whatever. And then after they're done, you all put those pieces of paper together and figure out who won, so to speak. Even though everybody knows that the interview panel, it's not a democracy, the hiring authority, be it the director or the manager, is the person who gets to make that final decision. But having those scoring sheets, when I litigate these cases and I defend accusations of discriminatory hiring or discriminatory promotion, if I've got that kind of paperwork, it helps me, to go ahead and defend and say, look, you had 3 different people in the room. They all scored independent of each other. Here's what they came up with. And then also, by the time 2 years later, when those folks are getting deposed in the lawsuit, they can remember what they thought of those candidates because they've got their notes right there that they took. So those are, a few things that I had. I know I jumped ahead to 305, but
That's currently what we do. That's our practice.
So should that be more closely reflected, or do you refer to other policies? To me, this is not clear. So I don't know how we,
And since this is an area where I think any organization is at risk in hiring practices, since we referenced that document, I would like to see that document that
The
you
hiring
referred to, the
practice? Oh,
hire.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. And then make some kind of reference as suggested by the attorney, and maybe it's covered in that document, I don't know, but who has the authority to hire? How will interviews be conducted? How will they be documented? How will you respond to candidates that are not selected? And maybe that's all covered, but I would like to see it.
Yeah, I'll send you the document. That's not a
Perfect,
problem.
thank you.
And the city manager has the authority to hire. So what happens is a director will make his recommendation to the city manager, and the city manager will sign an offer letter or not. So.
And, all right. So if the city manager has the authority to hire, why is that not delegated farther down in the organization?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Is that just culturally, we've
No, it's the
never done it
charter,
that
isn't it?
way?
Isn't it in
Or
the
is it in the
charter?
charter?
Is it in the charter? The city manager does all the hiring.
there is,
He appoints, I mean, he doesn't appoint the charter officers or anybody,
I'm-
but he's responsible for, he's part of the hiring and firing process.
Well, I heard 2 different things. He's part of the process, and I heard he's the only one who can hire.
He's the only one that signs the offer letter, in other words. Is it
for all city employees,
all city employees?
or
The employee, the one being hired does, they'll either accept the offer or they don't.
So if let's give, if we're deciding to hire somebody else to work, somebody to work in the maintenance department, is it only the city manager that can do the hiring of that person in maintenance? And what about the department person, the direct supervisor? What role do they play? And I'm just asking, maybe this, but what role do they play in the interview process? Making the offer, the suggestion, and does it have to be the city manager because of charter, or is it just kind of tradition?
Article 2 says that it's the city charter that gives the city manager as chief administrative officer to appoint, assign, discipline, or remove.
there's a lack of agreement, you know, for the same reason that I think the better practice would be to have department heads be the disciplining authorities. The same logic applies to having department heads be the individual who ultimately decides on the higher offer. From my understanding is the administration has taken a position that the charter means no one else can do either of those things, the hiring or the firing. My opinion is that that kind of language is in charters all over the state, and the manager simply delegates that authority to his or her department heads. And there's nothing illegal about that. That's just an operational way to go. And again, why my recommendation is that you sort of don't have the manager be the hiring authority is because if you do get into one of those lawsuits of unlawful hiring for whatever reason, discriminatory, whatnot, if I have the manager sitting there in a deposition and the plaintiff attorney says, manager, please explain to me why you offered the job to this person versus that person, the manager is just going to say, I don't know, I wasn't in the room, I didn't invest, you know, because my director told me to, you know. So basically it creates a level of the decision-making is placed upon someone who arguably isn't the person who really should be making the decision. And I say that with due respect to the manager. I mean, he's the top person in our city, but that's where effective delegation kind of comes down. But it's one of those things where if the administration doesn't want to go there, then that's what we're stuck with. I did, though, want to go back, since we're in Article 3, just a couple of things that I had written down for y'all to think about. And the first thing is right below that yellow language, it says if an applicant feels he or she has been discriminated against. So, you know, usually the best practice there is to have your comprehensive illegal discrimination harassment policy, and then within it, have it cover both applicants and employees, and then have the process that's in place. Like, I don't know if the city has a complaint form, you know, like the EEOC and the FCHR have a form that says, you know, what is your name? You know, what are the date or dates of the incident that occurred? Please give a brief description, please sign this. You know, having that kind of a process is very helpful because it focuses the complaint of the discrimination, you know. So because if you don't have that, what happens is the story changes over time, right? And so then the city says, well, no, that's not true. And then the person says, well, but then there's this other thing that also happened, you know. So if you make it go to a form right away, and then your policy should say, and again, I don't know what capacities the city has in place, is you really should set forth who's going to investigate that, you know, that incident. And you usually want someone who is a trained, you know, HR professional kind of person who understands how discrimination works and what the factors are. So I just put that out there. I don't know, you know, again, if the administration wants to go back, if you want to recommend that they maybe revise that. And then the only other part I had on 302 was at the very bottom, it says all vacancies shall be published internally and externally. And so you can have that as a policy. I just think, though, that locks you in, and there could be certain circumstances where the city wants to make it open to internal candidates only for whatever reason. You know, it could be because of marketplace, it could be because there are several internal candidates, and it's a philosophical thing, right? So it's not a totally legal thing. What's written here is totally legal, but sometimes for employee morale, you want to give internal folks the opportunity to have the opportunity to apply for that. And so if management says, there's at least 6 people here in this city who are good workers, who have been here forever, and now there's a superintendent position that's come open. Why would you open that up to the outside world if you've got these folks who could be promoted? And if you do open it up to the outside world, you could well get someone who really is more qualified because he or she has been a superintendent for 10 years or whatever. But then the folks who are here working for the city feel, geez, when am I ever going to get to advance? Because there's always going to be somebody from Pinellas County or whatever that's got more experience or whatnot. So keeping that flexibility is something that you and the city might want to think about. If you write it the way it's written, you are not allowed to do anything other than every single job is always open to everybody.
Point taken, I'd like the city to at least consider the attorney's thoughts and whether or not we want to, I see the philosophical difference in it. Now, the other thing I'm hearing is that our attorney is recommending that there be a formal complaint process, including who investigates it. So,
It's addressed in there, but a different section.
okay. I'll star that.
And also
And,
on the
well,
section.
if it's addressed, should it be moved here to this
Right.
section?
Also, on the section that the attorney was just referencing, if he would state what section and what he would like us to add in there so that we can do that for the next meeting. His recommendation of how he wants it changed.
That would be appreciated.
Yeah, and that way we're not going
Mhm.
back to the table on it. If we can do that now.
Rob, are you prepared to do that now or?
I wasn't asked to be prepared to do that coming here today. I don't even have my recommendation. You know, like I said before, I made my recommendations. They didn't make their way into this document. Ergo, my belief is they were affirmatively rejected. And so I'm simply now saying, if what I had offered before didn't make its way in, some additional language should be added. And so I'm just putting it out there in a more general
Okay.
way.
So
Is that
just-
section 302 you're referring to?
There is, I mean, that document is very detailed on this part, and I recommend that that be reviewed and considered. It's very detailed. It's got its whole policy in the back with step by step, and he probably can't cite it, but yeah, next time I'll bring a copy of that.
Is that for section 302?
Yes, ma'am. I think the entirety of, I think more than one, it applies to more than one section in Article 3.
Okay.
So I
Article-
would recommend taking a look at his work product and
and
finding
come
the
up with
parts that
something.
are,
Okay.
it applies to a lot of it.
I'm sorry, I've got two conversations going here. Paul's looking for the original document that was sent by the attorney, and I'm happy
We don't
to-
have that printed.
I have it.
You do? Oh,
I do.
okay.
So
She has it printed.
in order to be, yeah, I got it, and Judith Ann and I got it as a result of our last meeting, but I think we all need to have a copy of that.
Yeah, we
So-
emailed it out to everybody.
Oh, email. Could I get a hard
Well,
copy?
You want a
Consider-
hard copy? Okay.
Considering that we're all volunteers and maybe don't have the best printing capability or a budget for ink, especially if the document is this big, I think it's fair to request that
That
you,
is,
that
it
you give
is.
us.
Yeah, at the
printed
last
copies.
meeting, we were just asked to email it to you, but we're more than happy to print that and have that available to
Right.
you.
I think
Yes,
everybody
ma'am.
should have a copy for the next meeting. Is that fair?
That's fair. So let's go back then to this section 301. Christina is saying that she likes the policy that's in the, I don't know, what do we call that that document?
Attorney's version.
What's that?
The
The
attorney
the
version,
attorney version.
But yes, I'd say let's give everyone a chance to review it separately. Is that fair? And we can
Yes.
I think unless you guys have it available, but we may be.
Are you in Article 4?
We're still on Article 3, I believe,
3, yeah.
right?
I'd recommend we table this for now because
That's what I was just going to say.
yeah,
Let's go
we're-
back to, let's revisit because I think it does bear time to take a look at that and compare the two versions. I think we're all feeling like it needs some more, but now is not the time to all sit and do it. So,
So we've
Okay.
already spent over an hour or about. so-
I'm sorry, Paul, can you
How far
use your
we-
microphone?
how far are we going to carry on? Are we going to come to any conclusion with this section, or I doubt it? Because we're waiting for additional input. So,
If, do we want to go through and hear Sean's, are all of the comments in blue your comments, Sean?
They're my changes, yeah.
Your changes? I mean, why don't we, since we have the group here, take advantage of that and, I mean, spend some more time doing that and then allow everyone to simmer on what, I mean, do you think how long would it take to go through your?
Whatever you like.
Can I propose that we just get up through Article 3?
Yeah.
Because to go through the entire documents, I think it would behoove us to spend some time at home reading it and thinking about it rather than go through the entire thing right now. And then save the next sections. We'll come up with an action plan once we finish Article 3. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay, so we're gonna,
I'm going to go backwards just for a quick minute.
Sure.
So what we were talking about in 301, the need for it to be more robust, I guess, is, I believe it's all covered under 1211. And what's the other one?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. There's 1211, and then there's also related to discrimination in the
Correct.
workplace is under 1201 as
Right.
well.
Uh-huh.
So we had the harassment under miscellaneous, but maybe we just pull out to have an anti-discrimination policy as an article on its own, because I agree, section 301 looks really short. However, there are several pages in this miscellaneous. But since I think anti-discrimination is more than just miscellaneous. So maybe that's the better way to handle it. We can take a look at the longer version as well as the longer version that's in here as well.
and then decide where it's,
Make it
yeah,
as-
good
yeah.
catch, then decide where is it best placed. I'm always
Or is it
nervous
fit in
about
one?
having things in different places saying the same thing, because if you make a
Right.
revision.
I agree.
I think it should be sectioned off like that.
Yes.
Great idea about making its own article, because even I get confused when I'm going through it.
Yep.
Because it's addressed in different places.
Yep.
It's like it's almost wanting you to read the whole handbook in order to come up with,
Well,
in
and,
some area, only in
Yeah.
some areas.
and you know, if you, I mean, it's part of why you're kind of mixing different things at the bottom of, I don't even know what page, there's a page 44, 49, and 67, all on the same page, but it's this 1211, and it says discrimination complaints, internal complaint procedures have been established and will be maintained under the city's equal employment opportunity / affirmative action plan, which I also don't think I've ever seen, and I don't know that you've ever seen, but the EEOAA plan has to do with how we make sure that we get a diverse workforce, what things we're going to do to reach out to women and minority communities and so forth. The making of a complaint of illegal discrimination or harassment should be like a separately dealt with thing. And you shouldn't tell your employees, we've got some other plan. This is your policy that you're supposed to read, and it's your Bible, and you're supposed to know how it rolls and goes down. But we've got this other thing over here, which you may not even know about, and it says how we're going to deal with things, but we're not going to tell you that here. You know, it just
Well, I believe it's
It
on
all-
page 50.
belongs in the same. document.
This is a lot of guidelines. And that's why I kept asking about other policies and procedures. If I'm to fairly evaluate the effectiveness and the protection of this for the city, I want to understand, if there are other policies, great, but reading just this document, it's been, it doesn't read as much as a policy and procedures for handling things. So that's been the difficulty in
It's
reading.
actually more like a CBA, quite frankly, but.
And that kind of gets to, the criticism of it's too long. I can make mine a third as long as it is if I divide it up into 5 different separately titled policies and documents. The idea is to have, every time we hire an employee, we give them a document and say, this is everything you need to know about what the city's policies are, what your rights are, all that kind of stuff, apart from your boss telling you to fill that ditch or drive that truck or whatever your job duties are, right? And so if it's not illegal to maintain separate, this is our EEO policy, and but the employees need to get those, and they all need to be comprehensive, and they all need to be consistent with each other. And that's another problem when you maintain multiple documents, is you change one, and now it may be inconsistent with something else that you didn't think to change. So, again,
I
this is-
agree with that, and
I
I
agree.
do this in my job, like I help with personnel and hiring, and I agree with what he's saying. And I think it's in our best interest to consider that if there are other policies and because now you're relying on a manager, whoever, for consistency, and that's really not something, I mean, if there are other things that need to be in here as far as a hiring practice or other key items that maybe he handled differently, but if you already have them, why can't we attach them as appendices? Or I don't know if that's legal, but if there are other things that guide what people do on a day-to-day and you want to make sure everybody's getting those, can we get them into this, even if it's just as its own policy? Can I ask the attorney if would that be suitable as appendices, or are we not allowed to do appendices?
No, you can do it any way you want. I mean, I just think, I'm in favor of unified document with a table of contents, to where you say, okay, discrimination, I go for D, it's in section 22 or whatever.
I think in time you could get there, but there's also, they have to enforce it and use this. So you have to kind of merge the two together and see what is available. That's why I asked about the policies that might also need to be called out in here. Because that's why, that first question, it refers to other policies, but what other policies? I don't know. And maybe what he already had is already covered by stuff you do, but someone reviewing this, it's not apparent to me. So I would like to see any policies and procedures that are relevant to this that you already do for hiring or other things that are called out throughout this document, if possible.
I can send you the hiring practices. That's simple.
But are there others? I mean, is there a complaint, or is this the primary mode of implementing those practices?
When you say
Well, according to the
complaint,
policy, we know there's a EOAA policy floating around somewhere that supposedly has complaint procedures in it. So
So that's anything hiring, I don't know them. I can look, but I'd ask everybody to identify those policies that are called out in here. And I'd like to see them or consider adding them as appendices to this document.
Right. Yeah, once we see them, we'll decide, how does it make sense to incorporate? Good suggestion, thank you.
with the hiring practices, what makes me nervous is that, we're solid, 100% solid, but if we tried to change anything, like if we find that something might be different for,
You
something
want to
might be,
update, yeah. You
then we
want to
have to
update
update
your
the whole
policy.
thing.
Well,
You would have to come back
Attorney?
here to change that in
Yeah,
order
so,
to.
so typically speaking, you, you don't have to go back and change your personnel policy every year, because hopefully you, through processes like this, you really think through everything, and everybody gets to have a voice, and it's adopted, and it's good and solid. But, you also should adopt by resolution everywhere you can, every chance you can, because it's very easy to do. And, every employer I've ever advised, it's not that big of a deal to change. But I mean, if something occurs, and we can't prevent it from occurring, if Congress passes a new law that changes Americans with Disabilities Act, I remember in 2008, I had to go for all my clients and change their FMLA policies, because in 2008, Congress changed FMLA to add military leave because of the whole Iraq, war, and folks were coming back and having needs that didn't fit into the original FMLA. So it all had to be updated. And so did it add a few more pages? Yeah, it added a few more pages. Then now every manager knew who had to get those requests for time off, exactly what Congress said to do. And so it's not that hard to do. I do recommend, overall, I should have said this at the beginning when staff was doing its word processing, I don't really see any reason, since the document is adopted in whole, to keep maintaining things, like in section 406, it says, it references a 1999 ordinance,
Yeah.
a 1995 ordinance. I mean, all that doesn't need to be in there. The policy that's adopted by the commission is the most recent policy. So it saves, since we care about length, all those little cross references really could come out.
So how do we, am I understanding that you are to make additions, comments, changes, and we're to make comments on this? Or how do we want to, and I know we submit to you from a process standpoint, I don't submit to everybody, but, I think we requested some updates and changes. So how are we going forward? Do I continue to make comments and questions and, how are we doing this?
Well, if you want homework.
I don't mind, honestly. I'd rather get this right. I got a million things I'm doing, but this is important. So, yeah, I don't mind, and I'm probably gonna do it anyway.
I'd like to suggest that we get through Article 3 today, but since we did this quickly, that we're given the opportunity to go back and rethink this and submit additional comments for Article 3. And Claire, they go to you, right? So, and it would be helpful if you give us, you want these comments by this date, so that I would like to see them ahead of time, if that's permissible, and I can be thoughtful and more than just a week before the meeting. So that each of these sessions, we say, all right, we're all going to commit to reading the following pages, submit by this date. We will get them with enough time to at least think about them and then discuss them at the next meeting.
So our
Does
next
that-
meeting is June 2nd. When would you like to have?
Maybe like May 15th or something, because
Um,
we would need enough time to get them, put them in the packet, because they will be included in the packet. There
Okay,
just won't be any discussion on it until the open meeting.
so exactly. So, but we can look at it. So you want our comments on Articles 1 through 3, in case we have any, and as well as Articles, what's a reasonable amount so that we can meet our date?
Well, you should probably look at your target end date and then divide it
That's-
up evenly.
That's what I'm thinking we want to do.
As homework, you can have them to go through what other articles. continue,
Exactly.
And then make comment on, and then when the packet's published, everybody can look at them on their own
Mhm.
without discussion and make some recommended changes themselves and bring it back and talk about it.
So I'm trying to say, how many articles do we have? We'll do some third grade math here.
Some of them aren't changed much at all.
Even so, I would like the time,
Sure.
even though you didn't change it, I might have some input. So,
Do we just
Yeah,
do half
guess
and
what I
half?
meant is
It
some
sounds like
section-
we have 2 meetings before
yeah,
June, July, August, and we're shooting for September.
Yep.
So it's half and half is what I'm hearing. We're at
Yep.
12, so it's 6 and 6.
yeah, we've got
Um,
12 articles, so our goal for the next meeting is to prepare and be comfortable discussing through Article 6, having submitted all of our feedback by May 15th, so that there's time to collect and send out. Are we good with that?
I think so. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And can,
I'm not going to make any changes until I hear back from you folks. Is that correct?
Right.
and can we get the, have any policies and anything that's referred to as a policy in here? We've discussed too, but can we be provided any other policies that are referred to or important to this document?
When can we expect those?
Quite
Sure.
frankly, I don't know.
Is it,
I don't know. I don't know where some of them might be. So I have to do some digging.
I'd like to have it,
I'm really not sure there's much.
And that's
maybe
why
we
it's a
put it to the-
concern and a priority, because if you're asking me to get my comments in by the 15th, I have to see the entire
I understand.
work out there. So,
Maybe by May 15th.
I'll do my-
so
I'll do
by
my
May,
best to
by
dig up
May
whatever I
1st, you'll
can.
get to us
At May 15th.
anything that's referenced in the first 6 articles as a side policy.
So that can't be by May 15th if we
I
have.
meant May
Oh,
1st.
okay,
May 1st.
thank you.
That'll give you 2
Yes,
weeks.
ma'am, that's
to
perfect.
Add to your
That's perfect.
comments.
Just so you know, I'm gone for 10 days starting next week.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Hmm.
So I don't think I could do May 1st.
Karen might be able to pull some up.
Yeah, we can ask her.
And can
Let's
we,
shoot for May 1st at least.
and I mean, can we assist if we're reading through and find policies, we submit that to you? And if we find other referred to policies, that'd be,
Yeah, very helpful.
so 2 for now, right? EOA or whatever it was in the hiring.
And also the collective bargaining agreement.
Collective bargaining agreement, so 3 for now.
And we still have a little bit of
Wait,
a
what are your
ways.
3? Can you
sorry.
tell me what your 3 are?
Collective bargaining,
Uh-huh.
hiring,
Hiring, okay.
and
EO.
equal opportunity, and complaints if you have one. But actually, I thought there were, if there's a separate complaint,
There's a complaint procedure in here.
okay.
That's, I think, 1211, if I remember right. Maybe not.
So I feel good we've defined our next steps. Can we go ahead and finish Article 3? Is everybody,
Okay.
we only have a few more things. So I do have a couple of questions in 303 and 304, but I'm happy to pause and let everybody take a minute to read it.
I don't have any particular questions.
Okay. Paul, do you need a minute?
I've read it. and
Okay.
I don't know. I don't understand the age 40 question or older.
I'm sorry,
Why
can
is
you use
that?
your microphone,
Oh.
please?
Why is the age 40 in there?
It's federal law.
And we discussed, yeah, that might be sorted through. I actually did have one question.
Can you discriminate under somebody under 40?
Yeah, you can.
Oh, okay.
Apparently.
You
That's-
can.
okay.
No, I think you
We
addressed it
talked
and said
about
that 40 should not be
changing
in
that.
there. Yeah.
Mhm.
We're in section 303.
And can I ask, is in the hiring practices, the provisional
303.
hire stipulations, is that addressed? I guess for me, one question is, and again, I do this, I mean, is there a timeline on this? Is this something that, is it addressed more in the hiring policy?
I'm not sure what you're referring to,
The,
but
sorry, section,
provisional offer comes in the offer letter. So basically, it says you've been offered the job of whatever it is, your pay rate, it lists all your benefits, but it's contingent upon you passing your drug screen, your physical, whatever else you need to do, probation.
is there a timeline with which the city has to distribute those tests? Like for us, we were having issues with drug testing and hire rate and everything.
They only do it when they're hired or post-accident.
I guess well, that's fine.
Yeah, you're not allowed to drug test new hires for public employment here in Florida unless it is a safety-sensitive position.
So is that why it says safety sensitive or special risk positions? That was one of my questions. So Florida prohibits drug testing.
The United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit ruled in a suit against Governor Scott that it had to do with teachers, drug testing, pre-employment drug testing of teachers. And the 11th Circuit said that that's unconstitutional and that only people who are safety sensitive, so you're talking police officers, firefighters, people who use chainsaws, people who drive dump trucks, but certainly not teachers. And so that's yellow because was one of the things that I pointed out in my meeting with Manager Daniels and the HR directors.
Yeah, the other side of that coin, which makes it clear as mud, our insurance company gives us a discount on our workers' comp if we drug test and do the physical for everybody.
Right.
So they're kind of not
Wow,
working together, I guess.
wow.
And pre-employment physicals are even worse because, you know, you have Americans with Disabilities Act situation. So if you're going to do a pre-employment physical, you really need to make sure that you can explain to the court how it's job related. Like I remember when I got way back in 2000, when I got hired at Manatee County, they sent me for a pre-employment physical. And I went to the county health department and they said, okay, I'm going to take this hammer and hit your knee. And I'm, you know, this ridiculous stuff. And so I went back and I'm the employment lawyer, right? So I go back and ask the HR director, could you explain to me what I just went through and how any of it is related to being a lawyer? I don't know. This is what we do for everybody, you know, and so they don't do that anymore, you know, and, but that's, if we do, and there are some city positions that may, because of the physicality of the position, may require a physical, like a firefighter or whatever, we would want to do a physical. But certainly an executive assistant or whatnot, there's just no need to do a physical.
So a couple of things in this area of drug testing. So Rob, you're comfortable with the language that we have?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The
so we're-
yellow part of it, yes.
That's so, and that's interesting. Sean, I guess to you that we've got an issue that what are we telling our insurance company? That
Well-
no, we're not doing drug screens, therefore we're not eligible for a discount.
No. Currently, we're following our old practice of drug screening everybody when they're hired until this goes through. Now, I don't know
That's
what the
against
insurance
my-
reaction is
That's
gonna be.
against my advice.
I have a concern about this. If this has been decided by the Florida court, we are at risk. Any candidate that comes in and gets drug tested, the city is at risk.
I don't disagree with you. I'm caught between a huge discount on workers' comp versus this.
Can
so-
it be optional?
Huh?
Can it be optional to, I guess that doesn't make sense.
I understand
The
exactly
attorney,
what
like,
you're
could
saying.
you could give them,
An employee can volunteer to be tested.
just seeing if there's a loophole, if you could get your discount while,
So I'm trying to think, and again, this is not personal. I
Oh, I
feel, I
understand.
feel
I
your
understand.
pain on this, but I think that this needs to be escalated. We've got a target of September. Nothing happens if we don't meet that. Realistically, we could be a year from now before this is finalized. We can't afford to be in violation. The city is at risk. I think that this gets added to a priority list to be looked at, that an easy
Well,
solution is we go back to
well,
our insurance
well-
company and say, we want the discount, but by Florida statute, no,
Well,
we're not going to do it.
The insurance company is under no obligation to adjust its discount just because we're stuck with a federal case that says we can't do something as a public employer. The city is the client, right? It's the legal entity. And so how it works for any of you who've had personal lawyers, your lawyer gives you advice. You can choose to take that advice or not, right? You're the client. And so the city can say, okay, I have a known financial benefit in this hand, which is I get to keep having an insurance discount. I have Rob telling me that I'm not allowed to on this hand, but I am not being sued yet. And if I do get sued, I presumably we have insurance that will cover the claim. And so if I'm the city manager, what am I going to do, right? And so that's the business decision that they've made. And it's their decision to make.
I mean, I would defer to the city manager on that particular thing.
Can we at least ask you to, or, have a conversation with him about this? And,
Of course.
I guess my opinion doesn't really count. It's the city, but I feel that
we are part of the city.
we are part of the city, yes.
It's,
And
I think the manager understands that the Civil Service Commission desires at all times for the city to act in a lawful constitutional manner. So
Right,
it's-
right.
It's just
So-
it's a decision the manager needs to make.
Could I
Exactly.
ask, this is a logistical question.
Yeah.
Where can I find any prior history of complaints or, I mean, and I just don't know, there's a lot to digest on this. Is there somewhere where I can look at historically what we've had brought in front of, I think it's probably this commission or others? Is that available to the public? What we've been,
I don't know.
lawsuits
When
and,
you're saying historically, what do you mean?
yes, ma'am.
Ordinances?
Not current active cases, but prior lawsuits, complaints, and any of that that's been alleged against the city?
I don't know. I wouldn't have them. I mean,
Is that,
Well-
but that's probably
That's all
public
that
record, right?
is.
But
Or is-
are they
I'll check with Karen.
Okay,
'cause
and,
she
and
was
for
the-
me, I'd like to consider what we've come across and how we, that's why I'm asking, is because I would like to consider what we've dealt with as a city and if we're protected against it, or if we're just, because of switches of hands and people, we haven't covered ourselves. And yeah, so that's why I'm asking. I'm guessing it's public record, but I wouldn't know where to look.
The closed cases are.
Of
public
course,
record.
ma'am, yeah.
Anything in litigation or anything is not.
Is what?
Anything that they're still in.
Active.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. But closed in the recent past, that would be what I'm curious of. Complaints included to see if what we're dealing with and how we're adjusting this addresses those issues.
Correct.
I think
that-
I can bring some light on I guess, case that came
Couple
before
of
the
them.
Civil Service Commission that was quite complex, very interesting. And I would suggest that the members, if it's public record, acquire the records and review it.
Can we have assistance in doing that? I don't know where all
What
that.
is it particular that
Well,
you're,
maybe the case of Miranda, the
we should have those.
rec
court
department
reporter
employee
minutes on those.
that came before
I
the,
don't know where
Is
they
that,
are.
huh?
I don't know where they are.
No, I'm talking.
Oh, you're talking about-
I
okay.
think we have court reporter minutes on
yes,
those.
that
can
we
send
had,
out.
we had attorneys, we had court reporters, we took deposition or testimony.
They didn't do, yeah.
And then we were simply shut down in the middle of it by the city manager. So, yeah, I'd like to, I think to sit on this, you could possibly get some insight as to
where we've been?
where we've been and what we could come up against and how we came up against it. And more importantly, when the city manager is personally involved, how do you deal with him when he has power over you? That was simply how I saw the case, Clara. I mean, and the employee was mishandled from the get-go,
Yep.
terminated with, I think she was coerced personally.
It was set up. I
She
mean,
was set up and
very
coerced.
In my mind, this should be protecting us against that, right? And
Well,
that-
this sure should. And it should protect
it?
the employees.
Yeah.
Not us.
Yeah.
Or, and again, us, I'd like to bring up ask the lawyer, are we in any jeopardy of sitting on this commission and forming opinions?
So,
And would the city
That's a good
protect
question. I've
us
had the
if we
same
were?
thought.
yeah, no, so you have a couple things. You have the common law has a concept called legislative immunity where boards such as yourself can say whatever they need to say in order to help policy formulation. But also under Florida law, as long as you're acting within the course and scope of your office, then you can't be sued. And if you are sued, Florida statutes 111.07 and 111.071 would have the city take care of your defending you and paying any judgment. So the only time you get into trouble is if you step outside the course and scope of your assignment. So like your civil service. And so if you try to get into zoning or something, then you're on your own. Or if you violate sunshine or records or
Right.
ethics. But
So-
if you stick to those,
Yeah.
you're protected to do
Yeah.
your job.
So- And concerning that, in our committee here, we are permitted to discuss business with this group only in this meeting hall. Is that true?
Correct. You're not,
Yeah.
because of the sunshine law, you
Yeah.
can't
No,
confer
no.
with each
So
other outside.
My recommendation is that my other members acquire this material, this particular case. And it's quite interesting, and I think you'll have a thrill. But, I think Claire agrees with me in a way. I know you feel maybe,
Yeah, and also in that, having attorney representation, that's when the attorney's office had to represent the city and you all hired Dickman's office to represent the civil service board. There was 2 attorneys at that time.
Was this document in place? Was this, when that happened?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think.
this document that,
No, that was 18 case, wasn't it?
yes.
2018 was
18, it
Miranda.
was, that's why I mentioned
Got
it.
changed afterwards.
You know,
This
go
looks like
back
it goes
to
back
the
to
original.
1999,
Yeah,
1995.
well, probably.
Wait,
But the particular
it was
case he's talking about
2060,
that he
50,
actually sat in on with the civil service, if there was ordinance before that one.
Okay,
That one, this one got changed that we're under now came afterwards.
Yes, and by the way, I think it's taken a lot of power away from the Civil Service Commission that was in fact in power at that point in time. I mean, it was just a totally different,
Now, some
Document.
cities that have civil service boards, they actually have a procedure they come up with how they handle grievance hearings for themselves. And I did have a city to send me a copy of theirs that I could forward. That might be something to,
yes,
and
please.
compare it to our charter and come up with something or like that procedure or some, that's a whole different document that you handle your procedure when you actually have a grievance hearing.
Excellent.
and I would see that as part of the complaint process that we've talked about and how that flows. But good conversation. I'd like to suggest that we still have a little more in section 3. Let me get this knit out. The part under criminal history, it talks about risk to the business. Should that be changed to risk to the city, or is business acceptable? There are a couple places where the word business.
I'm sorry, what page are you on?
It's on page 10, section 303. It's in blue under criminal history. The last bullet, whether hiring, transferring, promoting would pose an unreasonable risk to the business. Is that acceptable to call the city a business, or should we just
The city.
the city?
Yeah, I think so.
And then my next question, I don't think, I don't. How are we handling marijuana since it is legalized for health reasons?
Correct.
If a person presents for a job that is considered safety sensitive or special risk positions?
Well, we're following federal law, which is, it's illegal.
Okay.
That's like the safest route to go unless Bob thinks something else, but.
Rob, are you comfortable with?
Yeah, that almost all public and private employers have not taken the bait of the individual states that have done some version of decriminalization because, as the HR director indicates, it's still 100% unlawful under federal law. And
Okay.
so we can't really be seen as sanctioning something
Okay.
that is unlawful. So, yeah.
And regardless, safety sensitive work can always, I mean, you can say you have a no drug policy for that regardless, right?
Well,
If
so
we're-
you're dealing with, I think since you're talking about 303, the question was driving toward the testing component, right?
Mhm.
But even if you have a current city employee who is caught for whatever reason, let's say it's a post-accident test, right? That somebody gets into an accident, they're sent because of worker comp rules to get a drug test. It comes back positive for marijuana. They're in violation of our rules and can be fired. And they can say, oh, well, I take it because Florida,
Mhm.
says it's okay, or I just came from Colorado or whatever, it
Right.
doesn't matter. You're still in violation and you're still subject to discipline.
Thank you.
I have a question on that. Is it, attorney, this is directed at you? Is it possible that we could have something in here that when you have an administrative employee that might be under the influence and their competency begins to decrease and a lot of mistakes, is it possible to have that person drug tested, or is there a
So-
way to deal with that person, or just let it go by?
Yeah, well, so, and I haven't seen your drug-free workplace policy, other than what's in this document, so, but there's a reasonable suspicion, the courts allow for a reasonable suspicion testing of employees. That reasonable suspicion, there's a lot of case law on it. And so what you usually do in the policy is simply refer to reasonable suspicion testing, right? And policies that I've drafted have language that talks about that in general. And then you really need to call me and walk me through the facts that you're seeing. And then I will look at the case law and say, okay, you've got enough. Because it's not just enough to say the person is spacey or like, there's one case where the person came in with glassy eyes. Well, people have glassy eyes for many different reasons. So it's usually, you'll need a couple of facts, either a history of a few weeks of this going on or, different kind of things. But it's always best for you to be able to testify. I called our attorney first. He said it was okay. So that if we do get sued, and it's a Fourth Amendment issue, a search and seizure issue for public employers, that you can at least say, I relied upon counsel's advice, and that's why I sent this person for reasonable suspicion.
Do we have an
Reasonable
additional,
suspicion's
So
horrible.
it sounds like I'm going to get a phone call this afternoon.
do we have, do we have an additional drug-free workplace
We do.
policy?
I
Okay,
put it on my list.
okay, thank you.
Um,
And Rob, is what's he's describing, I had the same question. It comes up in section 1210 about language that defines the actions if a supervisor suspects impairment due to drugs or alcohol. We don't have anything at all in there, and I think that's important to document.
Well, this
So
gets to
we'll
the
get
discussion
to it.
about, is that in the drug policy?
That
we
might
don't
be
have
covered.
yet?
Right.
So we're gonna get all
So-
those policies
Yeah,
and
Part
work
of
it
my
out.
too long policy had the drug policy in it.
We're
so-
gonna work them together. It's gonna be in there.
I liked it. That's part of my job at the hospital
Correct.
is if people are impaired, I'm the one that has to pull the trigger, but I know exactly what I have to do. And I'm not saying that what I do at the hospital is the same as what the city would do, but I know exactly what, what every role has to do. And I think it's imperative that we have that documented.
And I
as well.
think I read in the Florida statutes where even though somebody may be under, you talk to the attorney or whatever, but it says you do not have to tolerate them working under the influence.
Right.
I'll have to
But the
find that
question
because I was
always is
reading that.
whether they are under the influence.
they
That's the
don't
hard
work.
part.
And that's
Yeah.
when you
I
go
mean,
to
for
him.
example,
right?
somebody that's severely
That's when they go to
diabetic
you.
smells like they've been drinking.
Mm.
So
But it goes so far as if we suspect and we tell the employee to, look, go home, you're not productive, we are at risk if that person is impaired. And I think we really need to have a clear understanding, more importantly, the supervisors and the chain of command. There's a lot of risk at this, so
I think Rob
we'll take a look.
did it perfectly. I mean,
Yeah.
you call the attorney when it happens. Because there's a lot of different pieces to that.
It's very situational.
Yeah.
There's, really marginal things where I've told management, you just don't have enough at this point, just keep a close
Right.
eye on the employee. Obviously, you have safety issues. Then there's the case I had 4 or 5 years ago where a client called and said, my my sanitary sewer technician, we found him laying on the floor with a pill bottle next to him,
Ugh.
barely coherent. Well, that's reasonable suspicion.
Yeah.
So-
But just so long as we've got language somewhere that says.
There are some disciplinary, we'll look through this.
Yeah, we'll
but
get
there
through
are
that,
The
so.
disciplinary, like that was, I saw sleeping on the job.
Yeah.
Shit, I'd be in trouble.
All
Sleeping
right.
Yeah, group offenses also has some mistakes due to carelessness causing material parts or equipment to be damaged. So there's some, we
Yeah.
should all consider that as part of that group offenses.
All right, plowing through 3. I have a bit of concern about examinations. It talks about examinations, oral or written may be used to determine the fitness of the applicant for particular positions. Where does the city get these examinations?
This is a conversation I had with Bob, and I wasn't sure what it exactly means, but he said, okay, if somebody is an administrative assistant, we can give them an Excel test, that kind of thing. Do we? No.
There's also like for wastewater operators, there's a certain thing of testing and I don't know if that's included.
They would get a certificate.
What
So-
is that, would that also be covered in that?
I don't know if that's necessary. Oh, so if somebody needs a certificate, it's part of their offer letter. So it's contingent upon them obtaining whatever.
I wonder if that would be covered in some of this examinations, like if there's a particular role, like a maintenance operator, they'd have a maintenance test.
No, so there are 2 different things. There's what licensure is required for you to hold your position.
Correct.
So that would be, I'm a certified code enforcement officer, or I'm a Florida licensed attorney or whatever. That's paperwork that the city would look at upon hire to make sure you're minimally qualified. But the examination situation gets to more skills test or knowledge test based. And so, when I've done training before, I use the example of, let's say that the job requires a great deal of walking up and down hills. So you can, if you desire, take your 5 finalists and put them at the bottom of the hill and say, demonstrate for me your ability to walk up and down the hill. And so what you can't do is say, except you, young 20-year-old, because clearly you can walk up and down the hill, or if you're going to give a test like that, it has to be uniformly given to every of your candidates. But it can be, it's a very situational thing. If the city finds itself getting administrative assistants who lack the ability to effectively use Word, and they don't want to do that anymore, then they can just build into the process after you've had your interview. Here you go, sit down. My wife is the procurement director for a public agency. And so after she's done interviewing, she puts somebody in front of a computer and says, here's a purchasing problem. I'm going to give you 30 minutes. You need to write for me everything you're going to do, any of the mistakes you see in this bid, all that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to look at it because I want to see, you just told me you have all this experience. I want to see that you have all this experience. All those kind of things you can do. And I think that's what the examination gets to. The only thing I underlined on that was the last sentence that said the aspects of the examination process will be determined and improved by the city manager. Again, I think you're putting something on the manager that really should be more flexible in that. And if you're going to say anybody approves it, it should be approved by somebody that's appropriate, that has appropriate skill sets. Like there's lots of litigation from the 70s and 80s where the black applicant said, you're giving us tests that clearly were written for white people, there's cultural differences here, that kind of thing. So if you're doing a written test, it needs to be somebody that's a qualified person can test it to make sure it's race neutral and gender neutral and all those things. A manager is many things, but he or she's probably not going to have that skill set. So I would revise that language.
That's where I'm coming from, concerns that with good intent, a supervisor might come up with a test that they think is going to be really helpful. Like, our department, they're pretty stoic. I want someone that's kind of bubbly. I want one of those. So you give a personality test to hire for, it's totally illegal.
But my language, not to go back to my language again, but it had a thing where if there is to be such a test, that HR has to be shown the test in advance and HR has to approve of that test in advance, that kind of thing. So
That's what the language that I would like to see introduced, because I don't think it would be done with malintent, but I think that there are too many examples out there of people thinking they're hiring, but using a tool that's never been authorized for hiring. So if I could add that.
So you want to change the last sentence to HR? Is that?
I'm sorry, Claire, what?
Like in my situation, I'm a charter officer city clerk. I'm responsible for making sure that the employees working for the city clerk's office are educated in public records law and different things. We satisfy public records, and I've had it in the past where, the city was sued because of an employee not doing what they were supposed to. So I think that the kind of test, the questions that's asked should be tailored. I should be able to tailor that to what is actually taking place in the clerk's office. Is probably these laws, ethics laws and public records and different things. And also as far as when they go to get off probation or whatever, see if they've learned it and, sort of knowledge test, in other words, not based on whether or not you get off probation, but to make sure you're paying attention. And
I would just like to see that the HR director approves your test.
correct, right.
And
not
would
that,
that be Sean? Are you your human resources, human relations?
Yep.
Okay, same thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Right,
So you would be, all right.
yes. We
And-
tailor it and they look at it and see if it's legal.
Actually,
Yes.
more.
correct.
Random dates in my head.
So we're going to change that last sentence to approved by the city manager.
HR director.
I'm sorry, to HR manager.
Yep.
Yeah, great. And then the last one on selection, we already have input on this, including, what is that practice? We're going to get a copy of it. Who is the authority to hire? So we're going to get a copy of this and we'll most likely have additional feedback once we see that policy.
Would you want to see a copy of an offer letter? Would that help?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I
maybe.
think there's a few things that you're talking about that are addressed in that letter.
Yes,
So,
Okay.
yes. I think, why not? Unless there's a reason we can't see it, then
No.
sure.
got it.
But it does go back to the whole hiring selection process, who's in on the interviews.
It'll make your life easier. If you get that down, if it's not already, and
It's already written down.
Yep,
Yeah.
good. So we'll take a look at that.
that getting the 3 people.
Yeah, more than one person should be in
Oh,
Getting 3 people to help you screen people is,
there. Mm-hmm.
Well, some departments don't have 3 people.
you can
So,
take one from the other one,
yeah,
maybe.
Well, or that I know, especially where there may be controversy in a hire or the position is uniquely skilled. All the time, one government agency calls another government agency and says, hey, can I borrow your pavement marking foreman? We've got a pavement marking position open. And so to be completely neutral and fair, I want to add somebody to our interview panel from outside the city, and then, so you can do things to assemble, a good group of 3 people usually.
and hopefully we are hiring not just for skills, but also, I hate to say soft skills, but, we're,
yep.
okay,
There's a form for that.
love it.
The legal standard is always going to be the most qualified individual.
Yes.
And that's driven by the job description as well as those, when you get 2 people that they have the same degree, then you get into who's the best fit. As I talk to this person, are they going to work well with my team? Those are so you can take those into consideration. You just have to make sure that if you're sued, the majority of your decision is
Documented.
based on that
Documented,
written
yeah.
job description.
And it's consistent. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of section 3.
That's progress.
Feels like
It is.
progress.
So I think that we covered next steps, and in a moment, Claire, I'm going to ask you to say back what you think the next steps are, just to make sure. While you're gathering your thoughts, I would like to revisit something. I had asked for the minutes to be distributed ahead of time. And I got a response from Robin that minutes would be distributed 2 weeks prior to the next meeting. I am over 40, so you can't discriminate against me. But I would like to say that it would be more helpful for me to get those minutes within 2 weeks of this session so that my thoughts are fresh and not, we've got sometimes a 3-month gap between our meetings. So to get the minutes just 3 months later, it would be much more helpful for me to receive the minutes within 2 weeks.
That's a good request. Matter of fact, we had the minutes done within 2 weeks of of course, we have other stuff to do and other minutes to do for board meetings, but we had them done. But I didn't know he relayed at least 2 weeks, but we do them and then we put them in the packet or whatever. But if you want them earlier, that's fine. Whenever we can get them done as soon as possible, working it in and everything. So, because we have a big meeting tomorrow, we have, and as soon as they get done, we can send them out. And it will be way before the 2 weeks.
That's great. That would be a big help to
Not
me. So
necessarily, it may not be possible sometimes within the 2 weeks of the meeting, but soon as we get them done, because that's our priority, is doing those minutes as quickly as possible.
I would think so, because it's fresh in your mind. You're not waiting, I would hope, until
Right,
2 weeks
because I'm
before.
allowed by statute to send them to each one, and you can actually, individually, not as a whole, and then if you got any errors that you want corrected or whatever, send them to me, and then, and then whatever goes in the packet as, corrected. Then if there's anything else, of course, that gets corrected in the public meeting before they're approved.
Good,
Any
like it.
changes gets changed that way.
like it.
I have a question. If I'm doing homework and looking at stuff and I find prior cases, or if Paul finds that case that he wants us to review, what's the right process to share that, submit to you, and then you can distribute, or does that have to come to the meeting? Again, I'm still learning the process here. Like if I found a past case that I think everyone should review so that we can discuss the content and make sure that we're being protected.
I can send that out, and I'll just ask everybody not to reply all to it at
Okay.
all. It'll, if you want to discuss it at an open meeting.
Yes, yeah, that's what I mean.
can,
To
yeah.
get the information out, I always just send to you and then you distribute. Okay. Just, sorry, it's taking a while.
We have that happen all the time. I mean,
Then, Claire, can I ask you to review our next steps and our key dates? So
Okay,
that make sure we're all on the same page?
okay, now by May 15th, by May 1st, we're gonna try to have all the policies to you. And,
Mhm.
and that give you a couple weeks to complete your comments and have them to me by the 15th of May.
Wait, what's on the 15th?
Our drafts are due back with comments.
And that's sections 1 through 6 we're going to focus on,
Yes.
correct? Anybody have any,
Yes.
a different interpretation?
That's Articles 1 through 6.
Articles 1 through 6, thank you. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add? Okay.
No.
Then I would like to move to adjourn. Anybody second?
I
Okay,
second, third.
yeah. Do we have to vote on this?
No.
Keep me honest, okay?
You can, if they close the business, there being no other business, meeting's adjourned at 12:40.
Yes, 12:40. It's in our, Paul, it's Thursday, June 2nd at 10 o'clock.